Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack, back at it again to bring you everything you need to know about the Rookery dungeon in Season 2 of The War Within. And if you're enjoying these kind of videos, be sure to like and subscribe as it helps us towards our 100,000 sub goal. Now, first off, we start off with Kyrioss. We'll start with the bosses, then go into priority trash later. It is all about a game of patience with Kyrioss, as he's going to start the encounter putting out a couple of circles around all of the players with crashing thunder, and then just AoEing and splashing onto any players that are overlapping any of those circles. He'll also be pushing out with the Wild Lightning, putting out a number of circles onto players' location, so if you stacked against a wall, you could kind of bait everything towards the wall pretty easily. Then when the boss reaches maximum energy, he'll unleash the Lightning Torrent, and you can see where the beams are going to begin by looking at the orbs that are around the boss. Now, they've changed the boss since PTR, and it can actually go clockwise or counterclockwise, so it's very important for you to be standing in between two orbs and not on top of two orbs, so that you can then dodge the lightnings as they come out and figure out which direction those lightning beams are coming from. Afterwards, the boss is going to crash into the platform once again, and there's a big circle. It's super easy to see, to dodge it, and the mechanics repeat. Don't get too impatient, make space for your friends, and this boss should fall over. Stormguard Gorren is going to have three major mechanics you have to watch out for. The Chaotic Corruption is going to be put on one player, and it's just going to require a good amount of spot healing. After the debuff ends, it goes and transfers to the nearest player. And then the original first player gets a debuff where they take 200% additional damage if they get Chaotic Corruption again. And so you have 4 total debuffs that cycle through players. The person who gets it first can also get it last again, but anybody after that first player cannot get it again in that cycle. So you might have the ranged DPS get it first, they can transfer it to the tank will transfer it to a new DPS, and then you can go back to the original player with a rotation of 3 players to pass around. This is going to require quite a lot of spot healing, and you will need to be ready with externals if a player with a debuff also gets the Chaotic Corruption once again, because they take huge amounts of damage on top of the boss's Stomp in Crush Reality, which is going to send out big waves coming from that location, so make sure you have some space to be able to dodge those. And frequently, he can also combo Crush Reality with some of the Dark Gravity, so he'll actually be in this puddle that he creates and then cast Dark Gravity, sucking players in and dealing additional damage on top of it. The most lethal part of the encounter is going to be the spot healing, and so make sure, even if somebody drops low from one of the Crush Realities or the Gravity, that you're prio healing and focusing on the target who actively has the Chaotic Corruption on them first, and it's very easy for them to get comboed down with the burst damage going out by the boss's regular mechanics and that Chaotic Corruption dot. The Voindstone Monstrosity often starts as you finish clearing trash in the final room and begins with an Oblivion Wave, which is going to blast into the tank, and it travels very slowly and it kind of takes time for it to deliver, which means that it's very easy to kind of run across this path as a DPS or a healer, so watch out for those. The boss is going to have a shield upon him, and when you break that shield, it can then become vulnerable to the Storm Rider flying around the room, which can debuff the boss and make him take 100% additional damage. So the fight can last a really long time, but there are vulnerability windows where you can just pump extra damage and destroy the boss faster. The boss is also going to cast Unleash Corruption on 2 players, which can put a magic debuff on them, which can be dispelled, and when it does, it's going to drop a big pool of shadow onto the ground, which gradually expands. Early on, you really want to make sure that you're dropping these off in the corners of the room. You will be able to dispel one person instantly, and then you can let the other person either drop it off when it expires, or you can get like a late dispel onto them. But space is incredibly important on this encounter, and you see it very quickly afterwards when the Null Upheaval goes out from the boss. Now, the Null Upheaval knocks all the players back in the room and then places circles on everybody who's not a tank. It's also putting out a ton of void zones all across the room at the same time. And so what you want to do is watch for some of these pillars that are all around the room, as these are going to spawn the new adds that are just going to nuke and spread AoE damage and kill everybody. And what you want to do is get knocked back, wait for circles to clear your path so you can get towards one of those spikes in the ground, and then you should have plenty of time to get your circle, to destroy the spike, and then be able to make sure those ads do not spawn whatsoever. If any ads do end up spawning, they need to be prio targeted and killed because the damage they deal is insanely high. Try to make sure if you're a tank to keep that ad close to the boss as well so you can get the additional cleave damage, because once the shield is broken, then the Storm Rider is going to be able to stun the boss and activate that vulnerability window. After the vulnerability window ends, the boss shields himself once more and continues in this cycle of mechanics, meaning that the fight can last a long time. Players are going to be spread out into all kinds of corners, and so you're going to want to have somebody who's very self-sustainable, like a Death Knight, be on the far side from the group, while the healer can operate near the middle, and the tank can often just stand off to the side on their own and make sure that they are not aiming any Oblivion waves at other players. Many of these boss fights, pretty easy, and it's really a game of like patience to not ruin the experience a little bit later on with like puddles, bad positioning, overlapping onto other players, splashing damage onto them. Trash, however, can be very brutal. It starts at the beginning with the Quartermaster Cordalite, and what they do is they do a Bounding Void, which shoots out orbs, 3 of them, that also retract and come back. The best way that players get killed at the very beginning of this instance is they dodge the Bounding Void, and then the boss puts up a shield, the Entropy Shield, where you have to go behind the shield to attack it, and that also is in the path of where those orbs are. And so as the orbs come back, then players are standing right in their location because they're trying to DPS the shield, and they get instantly killed. Try to make sure as a tank you are pulling the Quartermaster into the most central location possible so that there's 360 degrees of movement all around the area so that players can dodge that frontal and also reposition their characters so that they can hit that shield from the back and make sure that they're not getting hit by the orbs in the process. Once you enter into the Rookery proper, you're going to encounter 2 different kinds of bird mobs, one of which is a Void Rider, which casts Localized Storm, which does large amounts of AoE damage. You want to kind of limit how big you pull around these Void Riders. And then you have the Unruly Storm Rooks. Now these are doing an energized barrage at a single player that cannot be interrupted. You could use Meld or something like that to cause the channel to end, but you also just have to blast tons of healing if somebody doesn't have something. These 2 together can be incredibly lethal, so make sure that you're focusing down that Void Rider, and as a healer, being ready to blast lots of AoE on everybody when those localized storms are going out. You also are going to need to have purges in this dungeon because the Cursed Thunderers are casters that are in the top right and bottom left corners of the room, and they all have these magic buffs which can be dispelled that increase their haste. And so you want to make sure that you are clearing these debuffs immediately as you're walking into this trash pull, whether it's single purges or a mass dispel. You need to clear them because these mobs just chain cast lightning bolts like crazy and do tons of damage. Once you're downstairs, the big enemy is called the Void Diffuser. Now they have 2 main mechanics. One is the Attracting Void, which places a circle on the ground, drawing players into the field and dealing huge amounts of AoE damage. This, you need to be preparing defensives around every single time that you pull one of them, not just large amounts of healing, because the Void Diffuser also is casting an Arcing Void on one player, which cannot be interrupted. That Arcing Void, as it sounds, is going to hit everybody that's in the circle that the player is targeted with. So they have a circle on their field, the boss casts a bolt into them, they take the hit, anybody else in the circle, it bounces to them and continues bouncing for other nearby players. So you want to make sure that whoever gets marked by the Arcing Void has a defensive up or an external up and is moved off to the side, whereas everybody else can fight the draw in of the pull together as they're fighting the rest of the trash mobs. This is huge amounts of AoE damage, and before you go and fight the second boss, you have to fight 2 of the diffusers back to back. And this is an area where you might want to consider having Bloodlust, especially at like higher level keys, because this should be around the time where you're 10 minutes or so into the instance, and they're just insanely deadly mobs. Make sure you're focusing one of those diffusers down, have your heaviest healing cooldowns at the start, and then make sure that you're cycling between defensives and AoE healing depending on what type of healer that you are. A good example would be if you have minute cooldowns, that you're popping those at the start for the doubles, then for the next round of the Arcing Void into, the Attracting Shadows, then you have people pop all their defensives. And then you're going to be able to have your 1 minute cooldown back for the next wave. Oh, one last thing, there's a Curse to spell, and it's super chill. You actually it just spawns like Void Zone circles under your feet, very easy to fight. Dispel it if you can. Awesome. After the second boss, you have two huge priority mobs, one of which is the Void Ascendant. They are going to be casting Feasting Void onto your entire party, and it puts up a magic debuff which deals ticking damage. And it's either removed by dispelling it, or mass dispelling it, or it is removed by healing up the heal absorb. And so players are ticking down while you're working to clear this healing absorb. Best way to do it is to make sure that if you don't have a healing cooldown or dispels, that you tell everyone just hit a health pot and you can clear this debuff and just be fine. Problem is, there's lots of these Ascendants that you have to fight. 3 to be exact, if not 4, in the Rookery as you're walking towards the final boss. So you're gonna need to be a little bit creative every time that you pull these, and you're usually gonna have to clear 2 or 3 rounds of it every single time. But no, if you can watch the timer for it, if you have an add-on like Big Wigs or Little Wigs that attaches the cooldown to the nameplate, that's super helpful for prepping all this healing and just being ready to blast the second that it goes out. You also are going to have some umbral waves, which are just orbs that are emitting from the Ascendant. You just have to dodge them. This is not too difficult to dodge, but just be aware of it because this room just gets filled with garbage mobs and nonsense all of the time. Some of the worst mobs to fight together is that Ascendant and a Consuming Voidstone. The Consuming Voidstones are going to periodically try to suck up any corpses that are near it. So if you're fighting any of these civilians, you want to make sure you kill them off before you actually fight the Voidstone at higher key levels. You might be able to get away with it at lower levels, and we know pugs are going to. But what happens is the Consuming Voidstone munches on these civilians, and then as it gets low, it casts Unleash Darkness, where it sits there and channels for like 20 seconds, does AoE damage, and spawns more void zones that you have to dodge. So when you have those void zones, that AoE damage, and an Ascendant together, it can get insanely deadly. Crushers that you're going to see at the end of the room, they're not that deadly. They kind of just jump at people and are kind of a minor annoyance. You usually can just fight them and be okay, but it's really the combo of void zones and circles at the very end of this dungeon which make it insanely deadly. Overall, I think Rookery is one of the easier dungeons that you have access to, and we'll have some press W, MDT routes and stuff like that coming soon. Check it out in the description. Overall though, there's a lot of areas where bad positioning or cutting other players off or not moving together can cause this cascade of issues in the dungeon that can be very, very deadly. So it's good to be aware of those things. And so thank you so much for checking out our guide. If you have any other questions or any mobs I missed, be sure to let me know. Big love to our patrons for making all this content possible. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll catch y'all next time.